Alright, and there's a little bit of a lull in the action here. Getting my men into position. Just along there, that way I can flank any Union advance by them. Although I am leaving my flank open to the attack that could come through the woods, as historically did. While we're doing this in this little bit of a lull, I guess what I'll talk about is the Union Corps commander situation at the Battle of Antietam. A lot of people have accused McClellan of having very poorly coordinated attacks at Antietam, and that's definitely true. But digging deeper, if you look at the Battle of Antietam, I could be mistaken, this is my own personal interpretation, but I would say the state of the Corps commanders in the Union Army of the Potomac certainly wasn't ideal at this point. There certainly were some competent ones, but if you look at the way the battle was run and used, it didn't seem like a lot of that was, a lot of them were used. For example, the Union had 6 corps on the field at Antietam. The 1st Corps under General Hooker launches the morning attacks. It's a very aggressive commander. He's definitely competent despite his later defeat and his perhaps overconfidence in himself. Hooker was a good commander. Not excellent, but definitely good, especially at the Corps command level. He led the attack on the Union left with the 1st Corps. General Mansfield also attacked with Hooker. His corps came in behind and attacked along with Hooker. Mansfield was a little bit older. He was 58. He was a new corps commander. He was competent. He was aggressive. And he actually fell as a result of wounds received in this battle. He did a decent job leading his corps as well in the attack on the left, the Union or Confederate left, Union right. So you have 2 competent corps commanders in charge of 2 corps that come down on the Confederate left. But then things get a little bit more dodgy. General Sumner commanded the 2nd Corps. He also attacked on the left, but also the center. He attacked through those woods that I was mentioning off to the right, as well as into the Confederate center later in the day. Sumner was, in my opinion, a very good commander, but he was also very old. At the time of the battle, General Sumner was actually 60... He was actually 65 years old. He was the oldest Corps commander. And here you see the Union troops coming forward. He was the oldest Corps commander in the Army. He had served very well on the peninsula with McClellan. At times he was very aggressive. Historians have really criticized him for his performance at Antietam. He used kind of an unusual tactic with one of his divisions, Sedgwick's divisions, as it attacked through the woods over here onto the right later in this day. And he also kind of lost touch with his other divisions, which lost their way and found their way into the center when they were really still trying to attack the Confederate left. Sumner may have performed poorly because of his age. He seemed competent at the very least, but his performance at Antietam certainly could have been better. He was a good commander, but I would say if you're relying on a 65-year-old general to command a corps after a very extensive and long summer campaign, it's certainly a risk. It's certainly worth something worth considering. You know, I wouldn't say this if it wasn't for the fact that historians certainly have criticized him for his age. Certainly he performed very well months earlier, but anyway, at Antietam he did not perform his best. I don't know if he performed poorly, but he didn't perform his best. Gonna send this regiment in here. I think I'm gonna trying to flank me, so kind of exposing myself here, but we're gonna go ahead and try and protect my flank. Hopefully I'm not getting hit from behind here. Anyway, going on. So on the Union left, 2 of the corps that attack straight down on the left, competent corps commanders. Sumner performs very poorly. For however good he is, he performs poorly. So you've got a very good commander leading the attack on the left, another competent commander supporting that attack in Mansfield. You have Sumner, who performs very poorly and gets himself isolated so that he's really only present with one brigade, so he's almost a missing corps commander for a large part of the day because he's not even with his other divisions that find their way into the rebel center. So I would say you have a very good corps commander, then you have a competent corps commander, a very poor performance from a competent corps commander in Sumner. That's 3 corps there accounted for. Then, if you look at what's left, you have General Porter, who performed very well on the peninsula as well. Actually did okay at 2nd Manassas. He gets lambasted for his personal differences with Union General Pope there, which ultimately the spat ends his military career in the role of somewhat of a scapegoat for 2nd Manassas, somewhat unfairly. His reasoning for not attacking at 2nd Manassas, he basically disregarded General Pope's orders for something like a day and a half, and then eventually followed them and his corps was virtually swept from the field. And he became kind of the scapegoat for that battle, despite the fact that he wasn't protesting against the attack on its tactical merits, so much as personal dispute with the army commander. He was a very strong proponent of McClellan, but his corps remained in reserve, more or less the entire battle of Antietam. And he also... McClellan seemed uncharacteristically aggressive at one point during the battle where Lee was tottering on the verge of defeat, and Porter remarked to him, "Remember, General, I command the last reserve of the army of the Republic," I believe were his words. And, you know, it's hard to say whether McClellan would have continued to press the attack, or whether he would have unleashed more troops into Lee and perhaps crushed him if Porter hadn't said that, but certainly kind of demonstrates Porter's own, not sluggishness, but his own hesitancy. He was a good defensive commander. He did very well. I personally think he was a very strong commander, but he certainly had his failings. He shouldn't have been the one who decided on whether the Union continued its attack or not. But as it was his last chance to really redeem his reputation. You know, maybe if he had gone along with the attack and become the hero of Antietam, he wouldn't have lost command of his corps and ultimately his military career, at least during the war. But he didn't, and after this battle, after McClellan was removed from command, he was essentially scapegoated for 2nd Manassas. Remember, this battle, Antietam, occurred only 2 weeks after 2nd Manassas. McClellan was Porter's friend and had put him back in command after 2nd Manassas. But after McClellan was removed, there was no more protection from him, and he became the subject of debate, if you will, over 2nd Manassas, and was removed from command for his disobedience to Pope's orders, even though some historians have said since that his refusal to attack the Union or the Confederate Army at 2nd Manassas when he was ordered to probably saved the army from an even greater defeat. As it stands, Porter was a competent commander, but because of his own lack of aggressiveness in this case, remained uninvolved. He also helped to keep General William Franklin's corps minimally involved. I believe only a division of Franklin's corps was involved in the battle. General William B. Franklin commanded the Union Army's 6th Corps. I didn't say it, but Pope commanded the 5th. Franklin's corps was kept largely in reserve. I believe one division was committed against the center. Franklin had pleaded with McClellan to allow him to attack the Confederate center at a moment when Lee was extremely weak and vulnerable. Franklin seems to have been a very, very competent commander as well, but does not get involved in this battle because McClellan fails to commit him. Franklin's career after Antietam wasn't the best. He did command a wing of the army shortly when Burnside's was when he was in charge of the army during the Fredericksburg campaign, but due to some politics and his own personal misgivings about Hooker, who ends up commanding the army later, Franklin really doesn't see a whole lot of service after Fredericksburg. So this is kind of the high water mark for Franklin's career at Antietam. You could argue at Fredericksburg, but that battle was so mired in failure, of which it was not his fault. Antietam was really Franklin's best opportunity to shine and salvage his reputation as a very good corps commander, much like Porter. Porter fails to become involved because of his own, essentially, willingness to sit on the sidelines and let McClellan not commit him. Franklin is not committed because of Porter's own insistence to McClellan as well. So through the first 4 corps that we've looked at, or 5 corps that we've looked at, 5 corps of the Union Army, you've got a very good commander in Hooker who launches a very aggressive attack in the morning. You've got a competent commander in Mansfield who launches his attack in support of Hooker. That's the far left. Then you've got Sumner who comes in a little bit to the right of the left, also hitting the center, who's not performing at his best. So, you know, a very good corps commander. I would say put Sumner in the competent category here, although he performs poorly. 2 competent commanders, 2 very good commanders, and then you have Ambrose Burnside, who's widely regarded as one of the lesser able Union generals commanding the entire right wing attack on the Confederate right, Union left, commanding the 9th Corps. So I'm not as anti-Burnside as some, but I will say that he certainly is not a good corps commander. So your only really good corps, well, Franklin was a good corps commander, and Porter could have been. So you have 3 corps commanders who have at least the potential to perform well on this day. Only one of them becomes involved. One corps commander simply probably too exhausted and old. And then you have a competent and a poor commander. But the only ones that get involved, you've got a very good commander in Hooker who launches the attack on the left, supported by a competent commander, supported by a poor performance from Sumner, 2 no-shows of 2 very good commanders who don't get involved, and then a very poor commander getting involved on the far right. So essentially the Union left 2 very good commanders out of this battle almost entirely in Porter and Franklin. And if they had been committed, I mean, you could look at it from more of a manpower standpoint, but you wonder why the Union attack was so scattered, so haphazard throughout the day at Antietam. And really, it comes down to just a poor chain of command. Your best commander launches a very aggressive morning attack, which does accomplish quite a bit. And after that, all the other performances from the commanders who do get involved are all substandard. And while the Union Army does meet with some success, it's haphazard and not organized well, and some commanders, you know, begging to get in and being refused, other commanders begging to stay out of the action and being, you know, being obliged. The command situation at Antietam just was not ideal. You know, 2 of the 3 better commanders, 30% of, you know, the army, as well as your more competent officers, are not involved in the battle at all. And this when you're outnumbering an enemy by almost 2 to 1. So, I mean, it was really, it's not surprising, I guess, that the Union Army failed to crush Lee, but they still accomplished quite a bit. And to me, this just underscores the reasoning for the very disconnected and ineffective attacks by the Union against the Confederate. It was the whole command situation. It just wasn't ideal, to say the least. Meanwhile, you have these, you know, 6 officers, as well as General McClellan commanding the Union Army, who's known for his unwillingness to get involved and get into the nitty-gritty of things and not commit forces all that much. You know, after you look at that situation where there just wasn't much connection, wasn't much unity and whatnot, you look at the situation on the Confederate end. Well, first of all, it's a lot more streamlined. You've only got 2 commanders. Granted, the army is much smaller, but you've only got 2 corps commanders, really. Jeb Stuart commands the cavalry wing, but they don't really participate in the way that the infantry does, so I would kind of put him out there on his own. He was obviously an excellent commander. On the Confederate end, you've got General Stonewall Jackson commanding the Confederate left. Legendary Civil War commander, one of the best commanders in the war, one of the most aggressive. I wouldn't say he's known for his defensive tactics, and he was very aggressive on the left of the Confederate Army. But obviously, you know, a legend in of himself, commanding the Confederate forces. And then alongside of him, you've got General Longstreet on the Confederate right and center, who, in a battle like Antietam, was in his element. Longstreet was the premier general in all of the armies when it comes to fighting a defensive battle. He, unlike many other commanders, was exceptional at picking ground. He was exceptional at setting up defenses and positioning his troops in a manner to succeed. He also proved his ability to launch devastating attacks several times. He was not as aggressive as Jackson. He would take more time to get things ready. But if you look at the Battle of Second Manassas and the Battle of the Wilderness, his attacks, when they did come through, were perhaps some of the most fierce, well-organized attacks that would have, you know, been organized on any side. His attack at the Wilderness was just textbook, smashing into the Union flank, much in the way that Jackson later or earlier would at Chancellorsville. But at the Wilderness, he smashed into an open Union flank. He seamlessly maneuvered his corps from marching over 20 miles straight into line of battle and slammed straight into the Union flank, nearly routing Grant from the field at the Wilderness. At Second Manassas, just a couple of weeks before this battle at Antietam, Longstreet took his time and organized his corps into essentially a swinging door which more or less swung shut and swept the Union Army off the field at Second Manassas in the largest single infantry attack of the entire Civil War, where over 17,000 men went forward all at the same time in unison. And he did a great job at Antietam as well on the defensive. He was the perfect complement, I would say, to Stonewall Jackson. And, I mean, these are the two corps commanders that Robert E. Lee has to work with at Antietam. You've got an incredibly aggressive, fast-moving, very smart, very competent, brilliant, if you will, battle tactician in General Jackson. And you've got a great defensive general with a phenomenal eye for the ground, and in General Lee, who is certainly more than competent. Both the Confederate Corps commanders were arguably better than anything the Union had to offer. Hooker probably comes the closest. He's more aggressive than Longstreet, but he's not a bad commander by any stretch. As I said, he's a good commander. So you have these two guys leading two huge wings of the Army, working very well with General Lee. And like I said, their talents seem to go well with each other. A very aggressive attacking general, a more methodical but very organized, very efficient general. Kind of like the hammer and the anvil. I believe it was Shelby Foote who likened Jackson to the hammer or the lightning bolt, and Longstreet to the anvil. And they really complemented each other well. This was arguably the peak of the Confederate Army in the entire war, in the sense that the Confederates, this is really the peak organizational standpoint. They still have a lot of their efficient generals, and they still have a very, you know, experienced military personnel as far as like the individual soldiers. But more importantly, the organization of the Army. This is the peak campaign season, 1862, from Second Manassas, when the Army is first organized into these two wings, through Antietam, and then eventually through Chancellorsville, is really the peak for the Army of Northern Virginia, where you have these two brilliant corps commanders, and you've got a brilliant Army commander, and everything just seems to click and work on all cylinders. And it really allows them to handle what the Union throws at them far better. And even, you know, with all these positives that I'm throwing out there for the Confederates, the Union almost won this battle. By all rights, they should have. Just a little bit more aggression, and they would have. Not that it didn't win. I mean, tactically inconclusive, strategically a Union victory. But they could have won it in such decisive fashion, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Here I'm zooming in on a Union artillery battery, just kind of looking at things more from the ground level here for a few moments. But I mean, really, that's kind of what the organization looked like out there. You had these two brilliant Confederate Corps commanders and a brilliant Army commander. You had some very tactically sound Union commanders, but it was just all... The Army did not work well as a unit. Corps commanders did not get along in many cases. The orders were not... I don't know, forceful is the right word, but they certainly were not efficient. And you just had... You kind of had chaos. And... You know, it shows in the results. One haphazard attack after another. The best organized attack of the day was probably Hooker attacking early in the day on the left, and then Mansfield did a great job of supporting him. And then after that, you know, the Confederates nearly broke, largely because they had stripped their forces from everywhere else on the line to resist that incredibly strong attack on the left. This would have been one of those battles where attack in echelon certainly could have worked. You know, the Confederates attack, or the Union attack on the left, Confederates rush all the reserves there, save the day there, and then a strong and coordinated attack on the center breaks through. McClellan fails to push it, but if he had committed Franklin right there, you know, could have broken Lee's army in two. The Confederates simply didn't have troops to rush there, and then if they had held there, because they did manage to scrape together some more troops there, there were literally no more reserves to resist Burnside's, but because his attack was so late, new Confederate troops had arrived on the field from Harper's Ferry. A.P. Hill's division, which was paroling the Union prisoners taken there, arrives in time to stop Burnside's on the far right. But that's without committing Porter's or Franklin's corps, really. I mean, two Union corps, over 20,000 troops not committed. As you see here, there's just these lines and lines of infantry. Just wave after wave, and if, you know, following what's going on the screen here, I don't have a whole lot standing in their way. I've got a double line of infantry off here on the left. I've got a double line in the woods, but the Union have a triple line of infantry across the cornfield here. They're obviously massing up for a pretty big attack. I've got a brigade here in reserve I could bring forward to kind of close the gap between these two forces. Got a big battery of artillery back there, but we'll see. Things could get kind of dicey. I've put most of my reserves into the field, and my regiments are far smaller than the Union. I'm kind of, at this point, I'm suffering a lot of what Lee suffered. You can either fully strip your forces elsewhere to help protect the left, or can hope that everything ends up okay. I don't strip as many of the forces from elsewhere as I could have. You see there the casualties on the screen there on the bottom are definitely mounting. Oh, never mind, I'm sorry. I've still got a couple brigades back here in reserve. Alright. Well, the triple line is still concerning, but at least I've got, man, a lot of regiments along this road in reserve. Granted, they're very small regiments, but hey, I've got some troops to play with. I'm going to have to deploy them if the Union attacks on that left. I'm honestly not sure at this point if they are going to, but I'll start bringing some troops up. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. Line everywhere else hasn't really been attacked. Troops just kind of sitting there in defensive positions. We'll see. I think Sumner's probably going to be the next unit to launch an attack on me. Probably Sumner. I would imagine Mansfield's still got to come through too. And Hooker will support the attack, I'm sure. It's going to be probably the strongest attack of the day by the Union. Probably 2.5 corps or so. And if Sumner is about to strike, he could strike the right as well and the center as well. I don't believe he attacks that early in the day, but this battle does have variance, so it's not entirely based off the timeline of real life, so things do change. But I don't think there's much hope with throwing back 3 corps of Union troops, but we'll see. Right now it's just the artillery duel going on. So far I'm doing alright throwing back the Union with heavy loss. Had a couple of tense moments a little while ago on that last attack. But had the reserves to commit to driving back the Union. Alright. Goodness gracious, that is a lot of troops. I mean, I know I showed a couple of regiments, but look at some of those Union regiments have more men than my Confederate brigades. Oh my goodness, if they launch all of those units forward, I don't think there's any way I can hold if they launch everything. Got a double line, I got some troops in the woods, I need to pull up these reserves. Close that gap, deploy them. I should have done that sooner. But once again, I'm making the mistake of deploying my troops largely in open fields. Kind of a little bit on the lower left corner of the screen, I am deployed along some fence lines. But this brigade that I'm pulling forward is just going to be standing in open fields. I don't believe those rocks are really there. I think that's kind of a graphical illusion. I don't think they give any defensive bonuses because I know some of the map is tied to the Gettysburg map, the way that it's all coded. So I believe, given that this is an expansion of Gettysburg, that that may not be as useful. Jeez, look at that. Just swarms of Union troops.